Hi, John McMahon here. Just wanted to introduce the little mini bonus episode with Dr. Wes Youngberg. It's really a reminder about some of the things that we discussed regarding us falling into the trap that just testing our fasting blood sugar in the morning and our A1Cs every 3 months is not enough. It's the same managing blood sugar trap that we fall into, that medicine traps us into, to control our blood sugar while not addressing the real problem. So without further ado, here's the short mini episode, a little over 20 minutes. Hope you'll enjoy it and get some more benefit of it, and we could focus on insulin resistance. Thanks a lot.
It's interesting. There's a lot has been said about, I wish I could just be normal. I wish I could have average health again. Well, average health is not something that anybody should wish for. And remember, average or normal is really a statistical figure that puts you right there similar to what most people have, or the average person has. Well, we've already established that the average person already has at least prediabetes. Okay? The average person goes on to get a heart attack. Okay? The average person at some point in their life will have chronic kidney disease. Okay? The average person will have hypertension. I don't want to be average. Okay? I want to have optimal levels. So the real take-home message here is when we do blood work, when we do testing on an individual, we'll see, oh, this is average. This is within reference. This is an acceptable level of risk. And I say, that's crazy. It's only acceptable to people who are okay with eventually getting a heart attack, developing prediabetes and onto diabetes, and at some point having a heart attack or stroke or cancer. So I don't want to be average. Average we should stay away from. We need to optimize. We know that especially in the realm of the insulin resistance of the brain, of the diabetes of the brain, or Alzheimer's, that we have no hope of improving or reversing those conditions if we just say, well, that's average, or this is a normal test, or we don't have to worry about that, this is okay. Now we have to go to optimals. And so if we want to accomplish optimal health, we have to strive for optimal blood levels and all the risk factors that we're evaluating. It's also been said that by the time somebody is diagnosed with early prediabetes, which again is like average, if you're in your 40s, that's actually expected unless proven otherwise, right? What the research is showing is that you've already lost about 60% of the function of those cells in your pancreas that make insulin. So you're actually already getting a senility, an atrophy of the cells in your pancreas that make insulin, to the point that you have a 60% decrease. The good news is that you can recover that if you address the cause. If you ask the question, is it possible that I'm eating something that is driving a dysfunctional breakdown and atrophy and senility of the cells in my pancreas that actually make insulin, that allow me to have healthy blood sugar levels? Is it possible that because of my sedentary lifestyle that I'm predisposing myself to this senility, this premature aging and dysfunction of that organ system that controls my blood sugar? Is it possible that because I gotta watch the Late Show, okay, every night, or that I want to read until midnight, that somehow that is changing my metabolism and driving a atrophy and disease of my pancreas that's setting me up for higher levels of insulin resistance, which lead to diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, and most cancers. So we need to step back and ask the question, what is it about my lifestyle or the environment that I've chosen around me that influences my risk? Pay attention to all of those. And if you do, there's a great potential that you could reverse all of that. We know diabetes is reversible if we address the underlying causes. The main cause is insulin resistance, but we have to understand what the multiple triggering factors are that drive insulin resistance. The main understanding about diabetes is based on how it's defined. And let's be honest, diabetes is defined by one thing and one thing alone, and that is how high your blood sugars are. How high they are before breakfast, before you've eaten anything, your fasting blood sugar. If it's 126 or higher, you have diabetes. End of story, right? It's reversible, but right now, at that point in time, you have diabetes. If 2 hours after a carbohydrate drink, like glucose tolerance test, your blood sugar hits 200 or higher, you've got diabetes. End of story. Now, what's also interesting about that is that a full 40% of individuals who have diabetes right now will actually be told they don't have diabetes unless they have a blood sugar check 2 hours after a sugar drink. In other words, the most sensitive test available to pick up diabetes is having your blood sugars checked after a starchy meal or after a sugar drink of some kind, generally about 75 grams of glucose. So there's three ways, essentially, to diagnose diabetes for most of us. It's a hemoglobin A1C, that caramelizing lab test that basically takes sugar and caramelizes it to protein in the red blood cells, and we're measuring to see how high that level has gone percentage-wise, and if it's gone to 6.5% on that blood test, you've got diabetes. If it's 5.7% or higher, you have pre-diabetes. So essentially, there's many ways that you can be diagnosed with diabetes, but they all relate to only one thing, and that's how high your blood sugars are. Here's the problem. Mayo Clinic, just in 2016, did a huge meta-analysis where they took all the studies that were looking at, okay, if we can lower the blood sugars with medications, then we should be healthier, right? Because diabetes is defined by one thing alone. That's how high your blood sugar is. So if we could just lower that average hemoglobin A1C test by lowering the fasting or after meal blood sugars enough through medication, we should be healthier, right? Well, the Mayo Clinic blew that well-established and accepted theory out of the window, because they said essentially this, that if you do the meta-analysis, by lowering the blood sugars with medications, you actually increase your risk of premature death. And the reality, we didn't even need the Mayo Clinic study. Every 10 years or so, there's been another big, huge study that said the same thing. So you actually increase your risk for premature death up to 2.5-fold by just going on a medication schedule, as opposed to addressing this naturally with diet and lifestyle. Okay, so essentially the Mayo Clinic said this: we have to stop focusing on approaches that simply improve blood sugars. It's not that we don't want to improve blood sugars, it's just that the way we do it determines whether or not we're going to get a benefit or not. If we do it with just medications, that actually increases risk. Okay, and they were actually using guidelines. If we lower the sugar, we'll lower your risk of heart attack, we lower your risk of kidney failure, we lower the risk of this. Actually, the reverse was true. Okay, if you lower your blood sugars for a type 2 diabetic with medication, primarily you actually increase your risk of kidney failure, kidney death, of heart attack, on and on and on. And so what they basically showed us is that all the guidelines that suggest just lower your blood sugar, doesn't matter how, we're focusing on the research that had been using type 1 diabetics, which have a totally different cause of diabetes than the type 2 diabetic, which represents 95% of diabetics. So the goal here is that we shouldn't focus on how good our blood sugars are, at least not until we focus on the most healthy way to to accomplish that. And we know from study after study that if you focus on a plant-based diet, that will improve your health tremendously, and by improving your health, it'll also lower your blood sugars. But if you just lower your blood sugars with a medicine, where's the real health benefit of that? We're not actually seeing that anymore. There's a lot of confusion out there in the nutritional community because, frankly, you can get really good blood sugar control by going on a high-fat, high-protein diet that's really low on carbs. The question is, going back to what we learned from the Mayo Clinic study, is that just because we get better blood sugars doesn't mean we're actually getting better health. In fact, we may be getting the reverse. You've got great blood sugars, but we actually may be dramatically increasing the risk of complications and premature disease and death. So what's really interesting is that if you look at the research on what drives chronic kidney disease into higher stages, and of course, a very serious complication of diabetes is going through the 5 stages of chronic kidney disease up to the point where you have end-stage renal disease, and now you have to go on dialysis just to stay alive. You go on dialysis to remove enough of those toxins that are naturally generated in your body, because the kidneys can't do that anymore. Well, the studies are very clear about this. What's one of the best ways to promote progression of chronic kidney disease? Eat more animal protein. Pure and simple. So if my goal was to help get people from stage 3 chronic kidney disease, which is actually average, which the vast majority of Americans at some point in their life, 59% or more, based on big studies out of Johns Hopkins and other universities, will have chronic kidney disease. And so most doctors don't even discuss chronic kidney disease until after stage 3. Because there's so many patients have stage 3 and they don't need to be in the hospital. They just have stage 3 kidney dysfunction. And so, but once they hit stage 4, okay, we got to start talking about this. And once they hit stage 5, okay, now you're talking about, well, we got to get a port put in because you're going to be on dialysis pretty soon. And so the key is we know we can reverse stage 3 to normal, okay, and even potentially stage 3B, potentially stage 4, but only if we actually address the cause of the problem initially. So what's the cause? Study after study has demonstrated that if you go on a meat-based, high protein from non-plant source diet, that will drive and progressively increase the risk of kidney death, which means you've gone into stage 5 chronic kidney disease and the kidneys just can't do their job anymore. And then ultimately will lead to death unless you intervene with dialysis or something like that. Kidney disease is definitely one of the top reasons people die prematurely, but sometimes, it's so toxic that people end up dying of a heart attack or a stroke before they die of the kidney disease. But the actual cause is the kidneys are not getting rid of those toxins, and toxins do a lot of bad things, including cause blood to clot, which then leads to cardiovascular events, strokes, heart attacks, pulmonary embolisms, and so forth. I've had many patients where we actually do a glucose tolerance test. I like a 4-hour glucose tolerance test to see how high the sugars go after a sugar load. How does your body handle that? Does your blood sugar shoot up and then come right back down? Or does it go up and stay up and never really come down until the 3rd or 4th hour? Or does it go up and then really crash and go low? So that's why I like to do not just a 2-hour test, which is all we need to diagnose prediabetes or diabetes. But if we add that 3rd and that 4th hour during that standardized glucose tolerance test, we can actually see a kind of a 3-fold trifecta effect on the metabolism where insulin levels are measured and cortisol levels are measured. So I've had patients on that test, blood sugars are perfect the whole time. So if that's all we did was measure blood sugar levels, we'd totally miss the dysfunction that is going on within their bodies. I've had even college-age students have perfect blood sugars, but their insulin levels were 10 times higher than they should be. So their pancreas is just cranking out a tremendous amount of insulin, just enough to get that blood sugar down to make it look like it's really good, but at a huge cost, because all that extra insulin is putting a tremendous burden on the body. All that insulin has to be broken down by the insulin-degrading enzymes, which, by the way, are also responsible in the brain for breaking down beta amyloid plaques. And so if our enzymes that break down insulin are spending all their time breaking down insulin because we're eating all this junk food, right? And snacking all the time, what happens is that it doesn't have enough time to break down the oxidized, damaged forms of beta amyloid that will then cause these problems in the brain that are associated with cognitive decline over time. So that's why I really love testing insulin levels in all my patients. And that has to be done in the lab. You can't do that on your own. But I do that fasting, along with a fasting blood sugar. Okay, and then I do the 1 hour insulin along with a 1 hour blood sugar after a sugar drink, and then a 2 hour insulin along with a 2 hour blood sugar, and so on. So by looking at that, I have all kinds of patients, perfect fasting insulin. Now a high fasting insulin, or anything that's above 7, or especially if it's above 10, is a real problem, because that means that in the body's attempt to control blood sugars, is having to produce all that extra insulin, which means you are insulin resistant by definition. And that insulin resistance has been shown on many studies to be one of the most powerful predictors of a heart attack or stroke. So it's actually one of the main risk factors for cardiovascular disease of any kind, affecting circulation throughout the entire body. Many doctors now are measuring fasting insulin levels. It's a much more popular test for cardiovascular health, as a predisposing factor towards prediabetes or diabetes, as a predisposing factor towards cancer, the common cancers, colon cancer, ovarian cancer, breast cancer, even skin cancer, and prostate cancer, strongly related to how high your insulin levels go. And so a fasting insulin is a great test, okay, but I have many patients who are really good at a fasting state. Their metabolism is good. Their blood sugars are good. You know, they're like between 70 and 85, which is perfect, optimal. Their fasting insulin is under 7, even under 5. That's really good. But as soon as they get exposed to a sugar drink, their insulin levels go sky high. So I say we should at minimum keep the insulin level at 1 hour into that test under 30. And almost everybody that I see goes above that. And some patients go above 100, above 200, sometimes 300. So their pancreas is producing a tremendous amount of insulin, and it's able to. So that's the good news. It's still able to. But the bad news is that even that amount of insulin is not fully controlling the blood sugars. So they're majorly insulin resistant. So we do the blood sugars and the insulin levels before and after that sugar drink to help people recognize, man, I really got to clean up my act. I got to get the sugar out of my diet, but I also need to be aware that a high protein from meat type diet also dramatically increases the insulin requirement, even though the blood sugars don't go up much. So you can go on a paleo diet that promotes meat, okay, and fat, or an extremely low carb type diet, and yeah, you'll get really low blood sugars, but what's going on with your insulin levels? So that's why the best foods that control insulin, that are shown to lower the hemoglobin A1C and the blood sugars over time in diabetics, is legumes. It's the very food that has been demonized on the paleo diet. As long as those beans are cooked well and eaten on a regular basis, you're going to have a dramatic drop in your hemoglobin A1C and your insulin levels as well. The key here is to test yourself. So I challenge my patients with what I used to call the Pepsi Jelly Bean Challenge. You just kind of, taking it off those old commercials of those challenges, right? And that is, go ahead and eat something that you know ain't that healthy for you. Okay, go ahead and do that, but check your blood sugars before, 1 hour, and 2 hours later. And so when I first see a patient that says, I want you to do something for 2 days. All I want you to do is just check your blood sugars before every meal and 1 hour and 2 hours after the beginning of the meal. Just keep track of what they are. Don't change anything. Just do that. For 1 day, do that. And then the second day, go ahead and treat yourself. Say, what would you eat if you went, I just want to treat myself? Because everybody thinks that for some reason, we should have a cheat day every week or every day, right? So we should just eat whatever, right? So find out what happens to your blood sugars if you do that. So I actually tell people, I had a patient do it this morning. They had a pancake, feast. Okay? Pancake syrup. Okay. So one of the things that we got to be careful in the plant-based community or the vegan community, pancakes and syrup, right? No bacon, no animal products, but it's horribly refined carbohydrates. It's not that carbohydrates are bad. It's just that these are horribly refined forms of carbohydrates that are going to spike your blood sugar no matter what, right? And so I have them eat that and check their blood sugars an hour later, 2 hours later. Okay, and when they do that, almost everybody will go like, whoa. In fact, I find a lot of people for the first time know they're diabetic by just doing that test on themselves. So I just eat whatever you would be tempted to eat at some point and see what impact does that have on your blood sugars. Then, after 2 days of that testing, okay, what I would actually recommend first is all you do is just keep doing what you're doing, but just add light exercise after every meal to look at the differential in that 1 and 2 hour blood sugar based on light exercise immediately after the meal. Not that exercise is the most important strategy. It's just that it's the simplest thing to incorporate to show them, wow, I can get quick success just by getting that light exercise in after the meal. And then once they get that success, okay, now we're going to do the real important part, which is let's now change the diet. So we combine the exercise with the optimal diet, and we see the blood sugars go from 300-400s to optimal values many times in less than a month. Okay? But we have to combine these strategies to be effective.
I hope you enjoyed that. I really enjoyed the piece about that exercising right after a meal, just that light exercise, walking for I think it's 7 to 12 minutes was enough to see an immediate result in the drop of blood sugar. That's kind of fun, immediate feedback. That little exercise plus getting used to doing, the test where you could treat yourself. What was it, with 75 grams of sugar? That's a lot of sugar load. But then see what happens, over time, the 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour, 4 hours, to see how we react. And then definitely add insulin testing to our glucose testing when we talk to our doctors and go to the labs, so they can really get a signal on what is going on with our diabetes and what the plan that we're doing is, if it's working. Because just because the A1C is coming down and the blood sugar is coming down, we're managing blood sugar, does not mean we're reversing diabetes. The insulin resistance is the only way to say if we reverse the diabetes. So thank you very much, and I'll talk to you soon again. Bye.